Welcome viewers, you're now watching Hornbill TV. This is your anchor Kekrizanyo Solo. Well, the question of indigenous identity, rights, land, culture and the future of the communities of Northeast India has once again come into sharp focus. On August 9, 2026, the Nagaland Indigenous Peoples Forum under the aegis of the Northeast Indigenous Peoples Forum observed the International Day of the World's Indigenous Peoples in Dimapur. The observance comes at a significant time with growing conversations around indigenous rights, protection of traditional lands and cultures, demographic changes, migration border security, drugs and trafficking, and the future of the next generation too. At the center of several of these discussions is the Northeast Indigenous Peoples Forum or NEIPF. Joining us is N. Ibungo Chaubi, a senior journalist and Secretary General of the Northeast Indigenous Peoples Forum and one of the founding members of the forum too. Well, Mr. Ibungo Chaubi, welcome and thank you for joining us. Well, let me start with from the very beginning. So, as one of the members of the forum, could you take us back to the time when NEIPF was constituted, when it started and initially how it began?
The very point or the focus of the indigenous people, I'm not quite sure whether the term indigenous was used in the past. However, the issue of influx of illegal immigrants in the entire northeastern region from the neighboring countries, particularly from Bangladesh and Myanmar, it has been an ongoing issue. And I can still recall when we were very young in the universities and we were in the college from the late 70s and the early 80s. The issue was mainly discussed at the students level, the youth level. Very fortunately, just before the COVID-19, around 2015-16, there was a wave in the entire northeastern region regarding the indigenous people, their rights, their privileges, the influx of the regular influx of foreign immigrants. Then in the year 2017 in September, there was a huge conclave, a conference in Guwahati. I was a member, I also was a part of that conference. I believe over 2,000 delegates from all over the northeastern region took part in that. People from different walks of life. Even from Nagaland, I suppose over 100 people came to take part in that conference. In September 2017, the people who came there decided we should have an open forum. And I think that was the time the Northeast Indigenous Peoples Forum was born in September 2017. And before the formal announcement of the office bearers and among other things, I was very fortunately chosen as a spokesperson in 2017 and as the convener. And we have traveled, we have come about 10 years now. We are still at an infant stage. We continue to work together, the entire 8 states.
As you've mentioned, it's been almost 10 years, it's been a 10-year journey. So, how would you describe the situation in Northeast India was when you initially started compared to now the current situation?
The only tragedy that we have in this particular region is we have two neighboring countries, which is Bangladesh and Burma, which is now Myanmar. The country Myanmar is caught between its own conflict. At the same time, there is a political upheaval. The Bangladeshis are looking for an opportunity to go out of their countries, and India becomes one of their safe havens, whether it is legal or illegal. And I suppose the very long international border between India and Bangladesh, it runs more than 4,000 kilometers. I'm not quite sure, but it is over 4,049 kilometers long boundary. That is a very vulnerable and a very sensitive issue, above which we have an international boundary with Myanmar, which is about 1,650 kilometers. Arunachal alone has 520 kilometers. Nagaland, I suppose, has about 215 kilometers. Mizoram over 500. Manipur has about 398 kilometers with Myanmar. When there is a conflict within their own country, there is a population which is displaced politically and they become an international refugee, and the safe haven for them immediately is in Northeast India, right from Arunachal down to Mizoram to Meghalaya, Manipur, Tripura, and those are recognized refugees. However, we believe that there is a population which is coming to this particular area with a determination in a very clandestine manner, infiltrating over the years to settle down in this country. I think that is the concern for the entire northeastern region, which is creating a change in the demographic profile, creating a political upheaval, at the same time the economic opportunities of the indigenous people. I think those are very key issues that we have been seeing and working in the last 10 years.
Since you've mentioned about borders and concerns, let me ask you a fundamental question. So, why does Northeast India need a forum like NEIPF? You've already mentioned how it started and why it started, but why specifically does it need a forum or a platform like this in the first place?
I believe it is a consensus of like-minded people who are worried about who are very seriously concerned about the next generation. When we were students, Dimapur was the first destination that we had to go to the rest of the country. We would take a bus, reach Dimapur, that must be late 70s, early 80s. We have to reach Dimapur. And if I look at now how Dimapur has grown up, and I think Nagaland itself also suffers from some kind of an influx which are legal or illegal, depriving the economic opportunities of the entire business hub of Nagaland. This is one critical symptom that you can see as an example for the Nagaland. When Manipur has its own inherent problem of systematic influx of foreign people, when the system is weak, when the politicians are not committed, our system is corrupt, it is very safe for a person trying to settle down and where there is no remedy to check the influx. I am talking of almost all the states in the northeastern region. Thereby, when we had a gathering in Guwahati in 2017, this was the common point that we almost all the delegates aired their internal feelings of the sense of security, and especially being concerned for the next generation if we don't do something at that particular time. And that was the reason why people from all different walks of life, we got together, and it is a forum which is open to share our thoughts, and at least we can communicate, we can share our thoughts with decision makers, particularly politicians, to ensure that our systems would become little stronger, build an inherent system at least to check when it is not too late. I'm sure the central administration is not going to give an on-the-spot answer to this problem. We're not going to have a solution. It is time that all the decision makers, particularly politicians, the bureaucrats, they need to wake up. It has been a long slumber. We need to wake up to ensure that the next generation will not face the same kind of a situation which is beyond our own control.
Well, talking about the economy, what are the specific political or economic and even demographic, cultural and say security developments that you believe could adversely affect indigenous communities, especially if they are not addressed about these issues?
We have been discussing with some economists and political scientists. Even we have had a round of discussions from people who are academics, scholars, well-wishers. Northeast region, particularly our region, we can say we are not fully equipped. We are not fully advanced both in terms of entrepreneurship. As I was mentioning in my speech the other day, When you have a huge project coming into Nagaland, the people might be happy, Manipur might be happy when you have a huge project. Our question is, are our entrepreneurs, are our business houses are able to take part in that process of growth? Are the people of Northeast mere manual laborers or carriers, rather than being a stakeholder, being a partner in that growth? And when we see this, when we often say this, some people classify us as anti-progress or anti-social elements. No, certainly not. Our view is our younger generation, our entrepreneurs should be a part. I'll give you a very simple example. When there is a project which might be about 1,000 crores or 500 crores, the Nagaland might be happy, Manipur might be happy. However, that project will go to a tycoon or a big industrial house outside that particular region, which is some kind of an economic colonialism where we are not a part of that growth. I'm just talking of economic growth, as you were saying. We should make our politicians aware that they should build a system where our entrepreneurs, our business houses are also part of that growth, the indigenous people. I think this is a kind of a privilege and a right that should be ensured to our younger generation. Otherwise, we will be mere carriers of a growth rather than being a stakeholder in that particular growth. This is something that we have been receiving feedbacks from different corners.
As a forum that works for the indigenous people, for the welfare, for the betterment of the indigenous people, when we talk about indigenous people, we are also deeply connected to our land. Our land is our identity. So with that comes the our forests. So when development comes, does your forum or does any IPF, how do you guys link or come under the spectrum of the protection for the environment of the indigenous people as well? Because with development comes a lot of changes, and when development comes, it does affect our forests too, our land as well. So how would you portray the work being contributed towards the environment or the forests of the indigenous people as well?
For the viewers, let me also recall how the Northeast Indigenous Peoples Forum has somehow progressed with the involvement of the indigenous people. When we had the first conference in 2017, we had about 10 declarations. That was to unite, that was to work together, harmonious coexistence, equal opportunity. That was a very comprehensive set of declarations that we had in 2017. One of the most significant declarations that we had in April in 2022, when we had our second conference in Difubar in Nagaland, we had 4 declarations, one of which I very clearly remember is documentation. We need a very strong database documentation of our own roots and cultural heritage and our own sustainable way of living vis-a-vis how we live together with the nature. This is something that I found it very important when the declaration was drafted after a long debate. Documentation which may not be official in terms of government document, however, that would reflect the indigenous culture of different communities, how they have lived together with the forest, how we have grown up with the forest, how we have grown up as a community. Again, in Jokai declaration in 2025, in the month of March last year, we had 3 declarations. The second was very important, and I feel the third one was very important for us, which was the common view of the people who came for the conference.
I'd like to stop you there. Before you go further about this, can you give us more insights about the Jokai declaration first?
Okay, Jokai, when there was a huge debate as to how, as you were saying, what would Northeast Indigenous Peoples Forum do? we were trying to facilitate a common platform where our younger generation could vent out, could share their aspirations. We had a long series of discussions little before the Jokai conference. And when we had the conference, when we were about to draft the declaration, their view was we should urge all the 7 states, we should urge all the state assemblies to open or to start an Indigenous Affairs Directorate or a department which would look into the grievances, which would look into the future of how we can secure our next generation, not only from the foreign influx, not only from the economic invasion, how we can be a part of that growth comprehensively. So soon after the Jokai declaration, we received a lot of information, we received a lot of recommendation as to how we can communicate to our political leaders that we should open. We have the power, we have the education, we have the PhD, couple of departments that we have, every government has, whether it is youth affairs, sports, health. Thereby, the people of the entire region being marginalized, we thought that it would be proper now, it is a right time for us to reflect the necessity, the need of the hour to open a directorate or a department of Indigenous Affairs. Very fortunately, the Nagaland Indigenous Peoples Forum, which is the Nagaland chapter of the Northeast Indigenous Peoples Forum, the members, and I was very fortunate to be one of them, we had a delegation to meet the Honorable Chief Minister of Nagaland, Mr. Neipf. We tried to impress upon him. We met the honorable MPs, we met many honorable MLAs, and very fortunately, we had a very nice gentleman, one of the very young, energetic MLA from Nagaland, Mr. Azo Ninu. After we convinced him, he brought the issue on the floor of the House of the Nagaland Assembly, and he had moved the private bill to ensure that there is a department of Indigenous Affairs, and reflecting to, as you were saying in the introduction, that we had the International Day of the World Indigenous People. The Honorable Speaker of the Assembly himself was the chief guest in the very function. Very fortunately, he announced that he would constitute a parliamentary committee to look into how a modality can be developed to ensure that we have a separate department as Indigenous Affairs. And definitely that thought process would be open to the public, the CSOs, the civil organizations, intellectuals, academics, and what would be the modality, what are the areas that particular department can handle. I think this will be one of the ways to comprehend and understand the feelings, the aspirations of the younger generations. In some way, I think it is just the beginning of how we understand to bring about a kind of resolve to that process of Indigenous people.
When we talk about the issues concerning the Indigenous people, be it socio-economic or the other issues regarding Indigenous people, out of all these concerns and out of all these issues, which one do you think will have the most long-lasting effect or impact on the Indigenous people in the long run?
I believe you have seen what has happened in Manipur. It has been since 2023 that the conflict is going on, and I am from Manipur. And if I talk about Manipur, it would be reflected as saying that I am saying it from belonging to a community. If you understand the genuine problem of Manipur, I can guarantee you, or I cannot guarantee you, that similar might happen in the neighboring states in future. Can you believe the kind of the animosity, the kind of the conflict emerging out of believed to be an influx from foreign country? We cannot assure peace for the next generation if, as I was saying, that if we don't control the 4,000 long international boundary between Bangladesh and India, an over 1,650 kilometer long international border with Myanmar. We have suggested from the Northeast Indigenous Peoples Forum that every single state should have a mechanism right from the village, whether it is the OC level or it is from the SDC level or the SDO level till the DC or the SP, to ensure that there is a regular inherent system to ensure that the indigenous people, the culture is protected from the outside growth of population, which would be beyond control after some time. I'm sure this is something that everybody now is airing out. You cannot check the entire 1,600 long border. It can be porous anytime. We believe that those genuinely displaced people out of the conflict, they become an international refugee. The only worry is, are they deported after the conflict, or have they found a permanent resident in our states? That is one issue. At the same time, there is also an issue of people who are coming illegally with a determination to settle down, which will be depriving our own economic privileges and rights, as they also fight for survival. I think these are two very important issues. At the same time, as you were mentioning, we are not only worried about the people from foreign countries, we are also worried about the huge influx of people from the mainland looking for opportunities. They have more money, they have more connections, and they have more lineage of business. And we are very young states. Northeast is a very young state. We cannot compete with the rest of the world, with the rest of the country, in terms of whether education or in terms of the economic development or in terms of business. Thereby, we request our political leaders to ensure that our new generation, coming up generation, are not becoming slaves. They are not the mere manual workers. They should be a partner in that growth. And unless we take a political decision at this particular crucial juncture, what kind of a future that we are going to leave behind for the new generation coming up, this is something that is emerging in almost every meeting in the Northeast Indigenous Peoples Forum. Of course, we don't have a legitimate right. We are not a registered body. We don't have a legitimate, but it's a voice coming out from the people. I think Northeast Indigenous Peoples Forum is offering a platform. We are reaching out to youth, at least to understand what would be their future, which is awaiting them.
And would you describe NEIPF essentially as a defensive platform? Like,
yes.
When I say defensive platform, like created to protect indigenous communities and the perceived threats. Just now you've mentioned about how the forum aims to connect with the youth as well, the current generation. So when I say threats, or as a constructive platform that can work with governments to say formulate better policies for the region too.
I did speak to some very elderly persons after I became the Secretary General of the Northeast Indigenous Peoples Forum, as to how there is a change in the demographic profile owing to the gradual influx of foreign people. And of course, I could have been wrong. I was saying it was either in a very subconscious way, or we were very weak, our elders were very weak, and they could not prevent the influx, the gradual settlement. You look at Tripura today, the Tripuris are now minorities in Tripura. You can see the entire Assam, how illegal immigration has changed the entire demographic profile of Assam, and how we often see Arunachal Pradesh becoming the safest haven for people running away from the different countries today. It will happen in Nagaland too. In some way, as you were saying defensive, I would rather say we have to build an immune system, a very strong immune system to defend ourselves. If we are weak, we are bound to be affected by even small elements. Unless we build a strong immune system politically and administratively, one time might come that it is beyond the control of the administration. I think it is not late. I think we should start now. Administratively, we request all the chief ministers. Of course, I would just bring out of the context. We had a discussion a couple of months back in the Northeast Indigenous Peoples Forum. We are going to appeal to all the chief ministers so that at least whenever they meet, whenever they have a political meeting of all the Northeastern region, the Ministry of Dawn or whatever it is, we would like to appeal to them to at least share their common issues of the local people being marginalized politically, economically and socially. I think which is the need of the hour. This is something that we see that will happen soon.
That's quite an intriguing answer from you. Well, Mr. Bongo Chaubey, before moving on to the other questions, I'd like to come back to the Jokai Declaration 2025.
Okay.
So, talking about the declaration, because this appears to be part of NIPF's current agenda as well, right? So, there is an ongoing discussion and a debate per se around the proposal for the establishment of the Department of Affairs, Indigenous Affairs in Northeastern states. So, what exactly does NEIPF envisage this department to do, and why do you believe a separate Department of Indigenous Affairs is necessary?
One of the key issues that we understand is the unrealistic growth of population of different communities in the Northeastern region. When there is a village, I'm just giving you a very simple example. When there is a village, when you have 30% population growth in 2 years, which is quite unnatural, while almost 90% of the village, when their population growth is about 9 to 10%, which means there is something wrong in that population, growth of population. There certainly is an anomaly. The very Department of Indigenous Affairs is to ensure that every village, every locality, every district has its own document. We can talk of the electoral roll, we can talk of the Citizen Amendment Bill, we can talk of the national census. These are regular routines of census, head count, population count. However, in the event of an unnatural growth of a particular community or a population from the village, and I suppose that would be the beginning when you have an indigenous department. You have so many villages in Nagaland. The village would have its own record of the growth of population, which may not be in the electoral roll, it may not be in the census. That authenticity of that village authority is so significant, and that would be one way at least to check the unnatural growth of population in our region. That would make the administration, the people, to identify who have come at what time, and they cannot certainly claim to be the permanent resident of this particular region. That is something, some kind of a threat that we are foreseeing. Therefore, we requested that this particular decision to open an indigenous affairs would be one window, one ventilator, one door, at least to understand, and open a forum, open a department, and then we can widen, we can elaborately increase its responsibilities, whether it is healthcare, whether it is education, whether it is a labor department, anything can through vis-a-vis the indigenous affairs department. This is something that we are emphasizing. At the same time, I suppose many intellectuals, academics, and particularly scholars, after the Jokai declarations, they have started discussing in the universities and colleges and at different political forums as to how this department can facilitate, help the government for the future generation. I think this is one positive way how universities are now openly discussing on this very topic. This came out through the discussions in this forum. In some way, the very existence and the veracity of the existence of the forum has somehow given a thought to our thinkers.
So, Mr. Bongochobe, basically this department, what would it specifically deal with? Say, primarily, is it going to deal with the culture, the heritage, or would you rather expect it to address wider questions?
I think when we have art and culture department, every state has art and culture. I think it was about last year, I attended a function in Dimapur, and few gentlemen, maybe in their late 80s, when children were singing, I mean, maybe I belong to a particular community, and they find that particular tribal traditions have eroded in the process. Say, for example, I heard some children singing a community song. When an elderly person identifies that this is, whether it is pseudo-Western or it has been Westernized. So in some way, even when you have an art and culture, we are not even able to protect the motifs of our own tribes, our own communities, the textures, the designs. So the indigenous affairs even would be assisting in our way of life, whether it is the traditional healing, whether it is the ancient way of livelihood. I am not quite sure, ma'am, if you know the very theme of this year's Indigenous Peoples celebration is respecting midwives. You know, midwives, we belong to a generation, we were born not by doctors, we were given birth by midwives and our elders. Now the United Nations is recognizing the importance and knowledge of midwives and its peripheral areas. Henceforth, despite all the technological advances, the very importance that we are getting of the ancient civilization, which has some values, and I believe till today, as human beings, we need to go back to our roots, at least to understand how we have progressed in a civilization. Particularly in the northeastern region, we need to protect ourselves of the influx, not in terms of economic, in terms of cultural advancement too. I might wear jeans, I might do whatever I desire to. At the same time, there is something called a root of being a person of this very land. I will give you a simple anecdote. There was, when you had the Olympics in Japan, some country had sent hundreds and thousands of people to influence their culture in Japan, to teach their culture in Japan. The irony is when they came back, they carried the Japanese culture at home rather than influencing. And particularly there were some youths, they had gone to Japan. When they came back, their parents were surprised. When they came back, they took out their shoes and kept outside their rooms because they have a very strong cultural root in Japan. Whether you sit, whether you eat, whether a social behavior, the respect. A child who is just 5 years old would take local trains to reach to the school, and the system, the society leads them. And this is something called a very strong strength of being a deep rooted social structure. And I suppose Northeast is nothing less than any other country. Yeah.
So, as we were discussing, Mr. Bongochobe, shifting the focus from implementation, shifting the focus from declaration to implementation. If I was to ask you the bigger question about implementation, more than a year after the Jokai Declaration, where do things stand today?
I would say it this way. When we have a very strong system, whether it is education, whether it is electricity in terms of power, whether it is in terms of PhD, in terms of supplying potable water to the houses, or it is the connectivity of the conditions of the road of the people of this region. When we talk of policies and administrations, ever since we became a part of this country, maybe after post 1947, Manipur became a part of India in 1949. If you look at the last 50 years, 70 years, when even we have a system, if you look at the condition of roads in the entire Northeast, and even if you can look at Nagaland, even in Manipur, whether notwithstanding the existence of the PHAD, which is to deliver safe potable water to every single house, we have not been able to, which actually means the commitment of our political leaders and the weak administrative system. Ever since we have made this declaration in Jokai regarding the opening of or initiating of this indigenous affairs, we have traveled, we have met the political leaders, and we hope that in the coming years there certainly would be a voice from the people of the entire region, whether it is Manipur, whether it is Nagaland, like the kind of messages that we have been receiving from the states regarding this indigenous affairs. It has become some kind of a movement for us, which I suppose one day it will reach on the table of almost all the elected members someday. Thereby, they have to definitely wake up. As I was saying that we have been in a long slumber, I think we have to wake up now at least to ensure that the coming up generations not only deprive, but they should have the privilege and the rights at least to be a part of a system. They should not be deprived of the basic amenities, whether you can talk of health, whether you can talk of education, whether the kind of the community's connections, connectivity that you have. I think there certainly is a political consciousness which we have to invoke. Somebody has to say.
So talking about voice, you've also just mentioned that somebody has to say. When you talk about that, do you think today, besides people from the forum or besides spokesperson in general, do you think the stakeholders, the indigenous people, the general people, the common people, do you think they have enough say when it comes to their land, their resources?
I think they do. Of course, if you look at the entire country as a whole, we pay tax in terms of whatever it is. There's something called a common property of the country, which I will not go into the detail. When it comes to our survival, when it comes to the deprival of our existence by an influx of foreign population, this is the main focus that we have to depend. Whether we are being influenced or our economic opportunities are deprived by people which is not our community. I think that is one key issue that we are trying to focus at this particular time. There might be other bigger challenging issues. However, as far as I understand today, we are trying to focus on how the indigenous people can at least protect itself by way of communicating to our political thinkers that they should have a stronger system to begin with, to protect the indigenous people.
When we talk about the protection or having a voice from the stakeholders' point of view, talking about the difference between Manipur and Nagaland, for example. For Nagaland, we have Article 371A protecting our rights. So what would be Manipur has Article 371C. So what is the core difference that somehow either preserves the right for the people of Nagaland or limits the right for the people of Manipur?
The very existence or how the Northeast Indigenous Peoples Forum was born, how we are going to be a part of that process of discussion on these it is not only that those two particular issues. We are talking of forest, we are talking of environment, we are talking of natural resources. Will the central government have any right to exploit any natural resources, notwithstanding these articles? This is also a long chain of debate that has been happening both at the national and the state levels. Our focus at this very particular point of time that we would like to carry through your channel is not the exploitation of resources or these very articles. We are concerned at this very hour of the displacement, of the change of demographic profile by a huge influx of people across the border. I think this is one key issue as of now, that the Northeast Indigenous Peoples Forum is seriously worried, seriously concerned. And maybe in the days to come, in the future course of time, we would definitely be discussing, we would definitely be delving into the categories of how these articles can be affecting our lives. As of now, we are concentrating on how the activities across the border is affecting our normal lives. This is one issue for the time being.
Since we're talking about borders now, let us turn to another extremely sensitive issue, the Northeast long international borders. So Mr. Bungochobi, how would you say, particularly with Bangladesh and Myanmar, the region has for years faced concerns relating to border management, migration, demographic change and security. So what is NEIPF's assessment of the situation along these borders?
This is precisely our response that you were asking. When you have a 4,000 long kilometer boundary, international boundary with Bangladesh, the Delhi administration or the central administration has a lot of, among other things, to do outside or inside India. What we are asking today is Arunachal should have its own system to check and identify and act upon, rather waiting for an outside treatment from the mainland, from the government of India. Manipur should have its own act, Nagaland should have its own law, because I believe the Nagaland border with Myanmar is about 215 kilometers. As I said, Manipur has about 398. Arunachal has over 520 kilometers long border with Myanmar. Mizoram has over 500 kilometer long border. We cannot mend these borders. We cannot check these borders. They are porous. It is beyond any human resources. Even if you have a wall, I have seen in the pictures that people are crossing by cutting the pipe wires during the gap when the security lapses are there. People are even carrying their cattle across the fences. The point that we understand is the determination of people from across the border to cross into this land. How are we going to build a strong system among the communities that has to be legislated by the respective states? How is a village in Nagaland, how is a village, a community in Manipur or in Arunachal Pradesh or in Meghalaya or in Mizoram going to be empowered at least to say that these people have come in and have a register, have a diary, have a system within? Hence, we thought that a Department of Indigenous Affairs will definitely play a very key role, an important role. The home might be busy, the finance might be busy, youth affairs might be busy. If we have an Indigenous Affairs Department, that will definitely play a very key role in that particular area. That was the reason which I suppose many of the delegates they voiced to have an Indigenous Affairs Department. It will have a wide range of responsibilities, which I suppose this will be one of them.
Well, there's so many other questions to ask, but since we're running out of time, I'll just fast forward to one of the key discussions as well. Mr. Bungochobi, alongside migration, there are growing concerns about drug trafficking.
Yes.
So, organized networks and the vulnerability of young people, particularly in border areas. So, do you see these issues as separate security problem, or do you believe they are interconnected with the larger question of protecting the socio-demographic future of the indigenous communities?
I belong to a generation born in the early 60s. I belong to a generation going to the college in the early 80s, going to the university. We were the first generation in the entire northeastern region when drugs came in to this very state from Golden Triangle. If you ask me how many of my friends have collapsed, I can tell you how many of my friends have fallen victim of the drugs, how many of my colleagues have been diagnosed or have been, I wouldn't say victims, but they have to live with most fearful virus, and many of them, many broken families, whether it is psychologically or emotionally. I belong to a generation affected by drugs. Today, if you look at Manipur, I'll give you one example since I'm from Manipur. If you look at how drugs have changed politics, how drugs have changed the psychology of people of this particular region because of the mafia or the syndicate or the entire group from the Golden Triangle. Golden Triangle manufactures one of the largest, so-called the heroin powder, which we call number 4. It comes from the Golden Triangle. One of the best routes from Golden Triangle to carry this substance is via Nagaland and Manipur, and of course sometimes from Mizoram. Unfortunately, when these drugs were passing through our state, many did not become carriers, but many became users. And today, when there is a conflict in Myanmar, I think Hornbill can do a little mapping of the mountains in Manipur in a couple of decades. How many mountains have been completely brought down, completely burned down? Phek jungles have been burned down for plantation of poppy plants because of the huge investment from the global syndicate of the drug mafia. When you have a drug mafia, you can buy the politicians, you can buy the bureaucrats, and who suffers is the indigenous people. You look at the entire climate change in the region, how many forests have disappeared. We are talking of disappearance of forests because of the exploration of the mines and minerals. We don't study the loss of forests because of the influence of the Golden Triangle and Manipur becoming a safe haven for the plantation. We have finished many forests, and now we don't only grow, but we have become users of that dangerous substance. I think this is a very loud warning for the next generation. Henceforth, we were saying, if there is an Indigenous Affairs department, how the forest has been generally denuded, that particular village or the authority would have had the privilege and the right to voice that this is not to be harmed. This is not to be done with. There is a social responsibility. I think we have to respond to this very dangerous issue of drugs, because we were activists in our college days against anti-drug. Those days when we grew up in the universities in the early 80s, and particularly from Manipur. And till today, Manipur suffers as one of the maximum affected drug users in the entire northeastern region. Maybe Nagaland has some, but Manipur becomes, because More becomes the only passage through that these harmful substances were transported. And I suppose, as I was saying, that you have 1 kilo of heroin powder, it becomes 10 millions in New York. It becomes 10 million in London. And if you are carrying a couple of kilos from here, you don't know the investment, you don't know the entire circuit. They will do anything. They would kill people, they will buy people, they will destroy people. I think this has to be something that we have to collectively fight, and this would be one of the serious agenda that we are concerned with. And I suppose, as I always hope, that indigenous people should be very conscious about their own roots, their own sustainability, and how we live with nature. As we grow, we have to think for our next coming up generations.
Well, we've discussed a lot about the issues and the threats or the risk, and also the aims and objectives of NEIPFs. But now shifting the focus to NEIPFs on accountability, looking inwards, NEIPF has been raising concerns and issues for several years now. You've also mentioned it's almost
about 9 years.
Yes, almost 10.
Yeah, we were born in 2017. Yes.
So now looking inward, Mr. Ibungo Chobi, what would you identify as your forum's biggest achievement so far?
I wouldn't count in terms of achievements because so far I have not seen any achievement. I would say that we haven't able to wake up the young minds. Let me recall last conference in Naharlugun. There was an essay writing competition which was conducted by the Northeast Indigenous Peoples Forum. We wanted to see the response of the younger generation. We received over 5,000 letters from the youth. Today the United Nations has categorized youth. They have restructured the age group. Earlier it used to be below 33, and today the United Nations has classified the age group between 15 and 25 as youth. The kind of response that we got it from the youth, so-called the students, by reading their write-ups, by reading their aspirations. We had a team of academics, we had a team of teachers from different walks of life trying to analyze what the youth age group is thinking. And now we are inspired by them, and in our next conference, which will be next year, which I suppose we would be announcing about an awakening of the consciousness of the youth. In some way, rather than looking at what we have achieved, we would be looking at how we have been able to at least enlighten, inform, create an awareness. I suppose I would look at as a step towards understanding and achieving. I think we have miles to go. We have just started the first couple of steps, I believe, and many of my colleagues who have begun our journey, we have given our time about 10 years. Many of my colleagues, they want to retire. Even I myself, we were trying to say that we need some young people to take over to at least to continue this in the way of creating an awareness. We would like to awaken the next coming up generations, which I believe our new generations, they are more enlightened, they are more conscious, they are more educated, and most importantly, they are more well informed than us. And I believe this forum is an opportunity because every single state has a chapter now. Nagaland has a chapter, Manipur has a chapter. It might not be a very significant, a large establishment, however small, I think it is going to be a very important voice of the particular region. And I think I'm very happy to be associated with the Northeast Indigenous Peoples Forum. And I would like to appeal to the youth of Nagaland also, and to your viewers also, that there should be a consciousness. Certainly, I suppose the youth of Nagaland will be very happy to be working for the future, because it is their future which is awaiting them.
So we've come to the final seconds of this interview, but before wrapping up, would you like to give any message to the viewers or the youth watching this? You've shared a lot about the forum too, the aim and the goals of the forum as well. But we live in a generation right now where we live at a time right now where we have a lot of cultural, traditional, and I would say even identity gap, because the current generation is somehow a little distant from their roots, because there are a lot of other influences, because it is a digital age. So what message would you like to give the younger generation, whoever is watching this?
My last conversation with one very young person, maybe of your age, and I was telling her that my father's name is Tombi, and my father's name is Chauba, and his father's name is Iboton, and his father's name is Pramanand, his father's name is Kero, his father's name is Mayangba, his father's name is Luangba, and I recited 17 generations of my own father. And that young lady was very amused, very surprised. And I said, my grandmother, when she was alive, she used to recite those names when we were children. like any anthem. My son today knows 15 generations, and when my father was alive, my grandmother would say, don't take your father's name because still alive. So today my son would take my name, but at least 10 generations. And that is how we identify ourselves as the indigenous people with that land, that very pride, the very so-called the sense of belonging. As far as I understand, when we have the Northeast Indigenous Peoples Forum, a sense of awakening, a sense of going back to your roots, you have to go forward, you have to progress. However, our consciousness is to understand the land which is ours. We belong to it. Of course, we are not immortal, we will go. However, there has to be a sense of awakening for the next generation. I would like to appeal to the younger generation that we are fading out, your future is there. For that future, you have to tell who are now in power that leave a space for us, do not corrupt our space, leave the roads, leave the system, and we will inherit that. I think this is a voice I suppose the younger generation has to say. The younger generation is very conscious of their career, their success. However, at the same time, we should be able to say that we belong to a community, whether it is a state, whether it is a village, and I think that consciousness has to come.
Well, that's quite an intriguing and also a very strong message from your side. Well, thank you for joining us and for sharing your perspective on some of the most important questions facing indigenous communities across Northeast India. From land and development to demographic change, border security, culture, identity, and the future of the next generation, these are issues that will require not only discussion, but sustained engagement and concrete action too. The August 9 observance may have been a moment to recognize indigenous peoples and their rights, but the larger question is what happens from here. As NEIPF moves forward with its proposals and consultations, the focus will now be on whether these concerns can translate into meaningful policy and lasting change. Well, thank you once again for speaking with us, and to our viewers, thank you for watching. Stay informed, stay engaged, and keep following the conversations that shape the future of Northeast India. This is your anchor, Solo. Thank you for watching Hornbill TV.